Welcome to the IISS this afternoon. My name is Rahul Roy-Chaudhury. I'm the Senior Fellow for South Asia and the head of the South Asia program at the Institute. In just over a month, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be visiting Israel, marking the first Indian prime ministerial visit to Israel. This takes place on the 25th anniversary of the establishment of bilateral diplomatic relations. In preparations for this visit, the first Indian presidential visit to Israel took place in October 2015, followed by the second Israeli presidential visit to India in November 2016, alongside the recent visit of the Palestinian president to India earlier this month. The first Israeli prime ministerial visit to India had taken place in September 2003, when the BJP government was earlier in power in Delhi. Largely in view of India's relations with the Arab and Muslim worlds, as well as the sensitivities of the large Muslim minority community in the country, Indo-Israeli relations have largely been shrouded in secrecy. Yet Israel today is one of India's highly valued top strategic partners and the third largest source of arms and high technology equipment. Israel has also emerged as a key player in India's economic development priorities. Prime Minister Modi's visit to Israel will therefore largely serve to normalize this important bilateral relationship. But what more can we expect from the visit? Will it be largely symbolic or substantive by strengthening bilateral strategic cooperation? And what would be the implications for India's policy towards the wider Middle East? Will India now adopt positions that are at variance with its traditional policy towards the Palestine issue? What will be the impact on India's relations with Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the GCC? Can this visit serve India to build India's relations with the Trump administration in the US? To respond to these and related issues, I am delighted to introduce Professor P R Kumaraswamy, who will be speaking on India-Israel strategic cooperation and future prospects. Professor Kumaraswamy is the Professor of Middle Eastern Studies at the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. He is the author of India's Israel Policy, published 7 years ago, and the author of a forthcoming book called Squaring the Circle, Mahatma Gandhi and the Jewish National Home. In 2010, Professor Kumaraswamy set up the Middle East Institute in New Delhi, the first of its kind in India, and serves as its honorary director. More important, Professor Kumaraswamy is India's top expert on Israel. Professor Kumaraswamy.
Thank you.
You'd like to...
Thank you, Dr. Rahul Roy-Chaudhury. He has said everything except one minor information. I was his we go back 20 years. He's a good friend of mine. So that's the most important thing why I'm here. What I intend to do is I'll give a brief sketch of the India-Israel relations. Then I'll take you to the next stage and try to answer some of the questions the chair had posed. If you look at India's policy, I would trace it about the 100 years time from the 1920s. During the Khilafah struggle, India identified with the Arabs of Palestine, not with the Jewish national home. We can go into the reasons. So from 1920s till 1992, what I would call India adopted a policy of zero-sum game. That is, if you wanted to support the Palestinian case, you should have nothing to do with Israel. Even a minimal diplomatic relations was seen as an anti-Palestinian effort. So that's why, in spite of the belated recognition in 1950, India never had relations with Israel for almost 40 years after recognition. From 92, when the international situation changed because of the end of the Cold War, India normalized relations. But if you look at in the 1990s, the policy was what I would call parallel track. That is, India thought it could have a normal relations with Israel as well as the Palestinians without adopting the erstwhile zero-sum game approach. That was more or less maintained in the 1990s. And that's why any major engagement with Israel was accompanied by a high-profile statement on Palestine or a meeting or a visit by President Yasser Arafat. That is how India dealt in the 1990s. A significant shift took place after the UPA government came to power in 2004. And for the first time, India delinked the bilateral relations from the multilaterals. If you are familiar with the Palestinian story, in the wake of the White Paper of 1939, the Zionists came out with a policy. That is, we will fight the White Paper as if there is no war, and we will fight the war as if there is no White Paper. That is, they were able to de-link the British policy in Palestine from the British policy in Europe, that is, fighting Hitler. And more or less, India followed the same thing from 2004. That is, a bilateral relation was de-linked from the multilaterals. India continued to maintain its position on all the key issues of the multilateral. Question of settlements, border, Jerusalem, Palestinian state, all of them, India maintained its position in support of the Palestinians. But the only difference was it did not allow that issue to affect the bilateral relationship. That is why even while criticizing Israel on the settlement policy, you could launch an Israeli satellite. So India was able to do in that balancing act. This is how the third phase was there. The fourth phase more or less begins with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And it took quite a while to figure out the contours of the policies. Because India did not issue any major policy statement vis-a-vis Israel. They continued the same traditional policy of the Congress party and the historical positions. But you could see a very gradual change. India was responding to the Middle Eastern reality. Palestine question is not the number one priority in the Middle East. The countries which supported the Palestinian question, they are actually fighting for their internal cohesion and state survival. Syria, Iraq, and Egypt. Palestinian question is important to them, but it is not the priority. Because for the Syrian regime, the existence of Syria as a state is far more important than a Palestinian state and the political rights. The same applies to Egypt, the same applies to Iraq. If you look at all the radical states which supported the Palestinian cause as the dominant foreign policy discourse from the 1970s, they are busy elsewhere. And even Iran, it talks about Palestinian cause only when it had problem with the United States. If you look at during the nuclear negotiations, Palestinian question was not on the table. So, while the Palestinian question is important, the legitimacy of the rights and everything is there, it is no longer the dominant political discourse in the Middle East. That is, an Arab country will not determine the friendliness of a third party only through the Palestinian prism. That was the case before, it is no longer the case. It took India at least a couple of years to recognize the ground realities. And if you look at it, from 2014, after he became Prime Minister, Narendra Modi dealt with all the countries in the region. And a number of Indian observers said Israel will be one of the first countries he will be visiting. And actually Israel is the last country he is going to go in the region. He has dealt and engaged with all the other leaders. His first visit was to UAE, then to Saudi Arabia, then to Iran, and to Qatar. And in between he went to Turkey for the G20 meeting. He hosted President Sisi twice. First for the African summit, and then for a state visit. And he has invited a Qatari Omani foreign minister, was the first foreign leader to meet Modi, a day after his inauguration. So he dealt with all the countries. The Indian foreign minister has met every foreign ministers of the region. Wherever there is a crisis or a tension like Libya, Iraq, and Syria, Minister of State, and Lebanon, Minister of State Akbar went. In the case of Yemen, another Deputy Minister, General VK Singh went to Yemen. So in other words, India dealt with all the countries in the region. And in between, the President went to Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. And the Vice President went to Morocco and Tunisia and Algeria. In other words, you had visits to all the countries. The only country where there is no major visit was Israel. But even that was taken care of by the presidential visit, as the chair mentioned, one by Pranab Mukherjee in 2015 and by Reuven Rivlin last year. So Israel actually come as a last place, but more or less he has taken care of all the Arab countries and their potential opposition. The last stumbling block was President Abbas, and he hosted Abbas in Delhi earlier this month. And therefore, the only place he had to go is Israel. So more or less, he has prepared the necessary diplomatic ground for a visit. And if you look at it, there is an interesting picture. The first place Prime Minister Modi went in Abu Dhabi was a white mosque. He is yet to visit any mosque in Delhi after becoming Prime Minister. In India, going to a mosque, he cannot do that because of domestic agenda. When he goes abroad, he is the most secular person you can actually imagine. He went to mosque in all the Central Asian countries. So going to a mosque, he says, I'm going there as an Indian. When it comes to India, I am doing it as a leader of the BJP. So therefore, you can see the dichotomy in Prime Minister's position in the domestic arena and the external arena. And he is there, he is the main architect and the proponent of Indian foreign policy and in Indian interests. And what do I visualize? The greater Indian engagement doesn't mean India is going to play a role in Middle East peace process. It's not going to happen. That's the last thing India should be doing it, because whoever played a role actually got burnt up. No American president has ever got re-elected because he was successful in the Middle East peace process. If the US cannot do anything in the last 50 years, don't even try it. So people are making very nice diplomatic talks. It's okay, you listen to them. It's more or like a ego massage. It's fine, take it, but not more than that. I don't think India is in a position, in a capacity, or even a desire to play a role. If they want to talk to each other, okay, we'll provide, like Clinton did in White House. If you remember, what did he do for the Oslo process? He put the table. The deal was done in somewhere else. So if they want to do it, India probably can do it. Beyond that, there is no, I don't visualize for India. The second thing is there is going to be an enormous defense cooperation between India and Israel. If you look at it, India is emerged as the number one market for the Israeli military exports because of a variety of reasons. China is problematic because of the US. A lot of countries in Latin America is becoming changing. So therefore, Israeli options are very limited. India is emerging as a great market. And for India, Israel is emerging as a major supplier. But there are certain inbuilt difficulties. Israel does not export platforms. I think that is where much of the defense deals are concentrated. That is where the real money is there. So therefore, Israel's ability to become the number one arms exporter to India will not happen. It's simply impossible. It doesn't have the wherewithal. And Israel will have to compete with other countries, France, Russia, South Africa, Sweden, in cases even Brazil, and above all United States, in trying to sell weapons to India. And we know that Israel and US has a lot of interest and engagement, so Israel's ability to export weapons to India or any country depends upon some sort of an understanding with the US. Either US provides technology or funds certain projects, or it has a much larger leverage. So therefore, Israel will not be able to export anything to India without the American concurrence. And if you remember, in 2003, our National Security Advisor, Brijesh Mishra, talked about India, Israel, and the United States, stating that we are friendly to both of them. People talked about a triangular alliance. I don't think it was an alliance. It is basically an insurance policy. By keeping US informed, India wants to avoid the same problem China faced when dealing with Israel. By keeping US informed, okay, you are on board, I'm telling everything, therefore don't create problems. I think that is what the triangular relationship is about, not an alliance. Because US is more interested in supplying weapons to India, even willing to make weapons in India, and therefore Israel's ability is rather limited, mostly add-on or what you can call force multiplier. Beyond that, Israel has certain operational limitations in terms of that. But India can help in terms of space. Israel is advanced, but in space technology, India is much advanced. So therefore, India can contribute. It's not going to be a one-way traffic relationship when it comes to military. What is likely to happen in the years to come is probably a greater accommodation in terms of producing Israeli weapons in India. Will it be like a Russian model of, only assembling it, or we are going to go one more than assembling, actually manufacturing? That depends upon the kind of political relationship that you are going to visualize between these two countries. I will also visualize, if the relations are stable, we can look at the possibility of R&D together. Joint research and development, that could be an area both countries could explore. Because India has a market, Israel has a technology, so you can have a greater synergy between the two, depending upon the political equations. Because military technology always involves a sensitivity of third-party illegal transfers. That's going to be a major problem. Before you go to other issues, a prime minister visiting a country is not a small affair, at least not after Modi became prime minister. If you look at it, he's been extremely selective in the countries he wants to go and in which order. And he normally goes with a shopping list. And a prime minister to go to Israel for the first time is actually extremely risky, because no Indian prime minister has ever visited Israel, and this is going to be the first visit. There is a considerable domestic opposition in India to kind of relationship which we are having. It's not that everybody is on board. There is a sizable ideological and political differences within the country. And the indications are Prime Minister will go to Israel without the usual balancing act, which means he will go to Israel without a trip to Ramallah. That's what the indications are. If you look at it, after 92, all the major Indian political visits to Israel also meant a symbolic visit to Ramallah. It looks like that Prime Minister is not going to do that this time, as of now. There is going to be a clear dealing between the two. And the indications are the political gains of a visit to Ramallah is negligible. You are not going to get any political mileage in the Middle East, saying that, okay, I'm pro-Palestinian, therefore more countries to be friendly towards India. That's not going to happen. The second thing is his agenda is largely economic development, in which case Palestinians are not in a position to do directly or indirectly. You can't say, okay, be nice to me, I'll put in a word with King Salman. I don't think they have a leverage. Once upon a time they could have done that. Under Arafat they could have done it at least. But today that's not the case, because India is dealing with all of them on its own, so we don't need a Palestinian factor to promote relations with any of these countries. We don't need that. So therefore, and the domestic agenda, people will be very happy for 24 hours. Yes, Modi went to Ramallah, therefore he's consistently signaled Nehruvian policy and he's validated the historical right position India has taken. It will be only for 24 hours. Everybody will go back to anti-Modi the next day. So therefore, domestically or externally, the political gains of a visit to Ramallah is nothing. It's actually a liability. By not going to Ramallah, he could actually increase his stakes in Israel. The only thing I'm still waiting is what will be shopping list in Israel. I don't think military sales or arms deals, that's not going to be the real attraction. Even a cooperation in agriculture is very good, but that's not going to be. The real interesting thing I'm looking at is technology transfer. No one transfers technology. You know that in India, the Brahminical logic was, denial of knowledge. Why do you think it's a oral tradition? Because oral tradition means only my son will get it. You will not, a third person. So that is why they never wrote anything for the wider audience. So therefore, no one transfers technology. So you have two options, steal it or buy it. Stealing is a nice option, but it's a short-term option. You cannot actually build anything by stealing. You can't do that. You can probably get one particular case, as a nuclear or something. You can do a development one, you can't go beyond that. You can't build a whole infrastructure by stealing. So the only way is to buy. What I'm waiting for it, whether the Indian companies, both public sector and private sector, how much they are going to invest in Israeli high-tech industry. It's not just military. I'm looking at a whole range of industry, desalination, recycling, water management, all of them. We need these technologies, and I don't think, we don't have the time or a space to wait for them to say, okay, India is a nice country, we'll transfer it. I don't think so. So whether Modi is going to put, I'm going to buy technology, which is critical for me. That's going to be the real issue. Before we wind up, there is one interesting thing which is happening. Israel has capitalized the Indian federal structure. If you look at it, a large number of Israeli dealings with India are not with New Delhi, with the state governments. And there is an interesting pattern. In New Delhi, the agenda is peace process, Middle East, balancing with the other countries, high political issues. But if you look at the state government, the priorities are different. They are talking about economic development, not about the peace process, bringing more food on the table. So therefore, if you look at it, the state governments are more interested in collaborating with Israel on issues like agriculture, horticulture, water management, all those issues which are non-political, which are professional, and therefore they are least controversial. With the result, no matter what you say in Delhi, all the political parties and their governments in the state are collaborating with Israel. Congress, BJP, left, everybody. Even left parties wanted investment from Israel when Jyoti Basu was the chief minister. The last country Jyoti Basu visited as chief minister was Israel. So therefore, if you look at it, when it comes to state government, the priorities are different. Even though a number of Western countries are also doing this, they are not able to make the inroad like the Israelis have done. So you have the federal structure is extremely helpful to Israel, which can be replicated in other places. That's number one. The number two is, the federal structure also has an interesting dilemma. If you talk in terms of peace process and everything, people can talk about boycotting Israel, Israeli scholars and other things. You can talk about political issues linking up to the peace process. But when you're talking about water management, you cannot simply say boycott Israeli technology. It's not an option. Because by boycotting Israeli technology, you're actually harming the Indian farmer. So what the Israelis have done it, you've actually moved the foreign policy from the urban elite to the rural masses. And I think that is where the real change is taking place. So if I use the word strategic relationship, it is not all the other things I said, missiles and everything, they are important. That is not strategic. The strategic dimension of Israeli-India relation is moving the focus from the urban centers to the rural poor by talking about agriculture, water management, fisheries, and these kind of issues. And with the result, you are actually building up a support base for Israel, which is more sustainable in the long run. Because people in Delhi can suddenly change. There is a violence and balance and all of them. Everybody will simply shift. All the old 70 years argument will come back. By moving to the rural India, you are actually creating a support base for Israel. By having a friendly relationship with Israel, I can produce more. I can make more money. And I think that is what the real strategic shift is taking place. I think I will stop at this point of time. I'm more able to answer any questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Professor Kumaraswamy. It's been a fascinating introduction that you provided, and along with deep analytical thought and perspectives. Let me begin the session by asking you specifically on the Prime Minister's visit to Israel. There seems to be clearly a sort of ideological familiarity and an ideological basis to this relationship. You've talked about the Prime Minister preparing the ground possibly for this visit by engaging with the UAE, Saudi Arabia and other GCC states and other Middle Eastern states. But perhaps it's not as sort of thought out and strategic as all that, but it may well be that there is a strong ideological basis to this relationship. We had the first a visit of an Israeli Prime Minister to India at the time when the BJP was last in government in the early 2000s, and we have this visit taking place. So I wanted to just draw out from you what you think would be the ideological nature of this relationship with this government, as opposed to a more sort of strategic perspective that you've outlined in terms of dealing with Israel in relation to the other countries.
Okay, the general the criticism against India is, it's a post facto rationalization. You should try to look for everything. Okay, this is why we did. That's a normal criticism. But I think there is an interesting thing. The pattern was not an aberration. It's not just he went to one country and then shifted around. If you look at all the 4 countries, there is a very distinct pattern. And if you read the joint statements issued at the end of the visit, there is a substantial focus on security issues, which was never there in India before. Security issues are normally referred to 1 or 2. If you look at the UAE as a template, 17 out of 31 items with both the leaders agreed pertain to security. That's number 1. And previously, when you talk about security, we only talked about collaboration with Israel. Now, because of ISIS and other issues, all India's relations with the entire Middle East has a high degree of security component in every joint declaration. They are talking about fighting religious extremism, counter-terrorism, cyber security, money laundering, all these issues, sea lanes of communication, all of them issues. Not only with the 4 countries, even the bilateral exchanges with Bahrain as well as Jordan, they talk about security. So therefore, I see there is a pattern in that. And I think, it's not that, he did one, but, there is a pattern which was, I would say that it's not the traditional South Bloc thinking. It's out of the box, definitely out of the South Bloc. They are the ones who are putting it. If I understand correctly, in most of the cases, the Indian ambassadors are unfamiliar with what will be the final declaration. It was more or less given to them. And if you look at our ambassador in Saudi Arabia, what was he before he came to Riyadh? Police chief in Mumbai, serving IPS officer. So it tells you that, your priorities have changed. Your nomenclature have changed. And the way in which you highlight the Indian interests have changed. Previously, people talked about they did not even mention the Indian expatriate in the joint communications. The Prime Minister goes and meets everywhere. In Saudi Arabia, you couldn't do this, so you went to a factory where only women are employed. So he is able to use the expatriate as a force, as a bridge with the host country and India. And I think that is where these are all, significant changes on the ground. On the ideology, yes. In 2003, there is a lot of criticism that, the Hindutva element was a dominant factor. The BJP in India and the Likud in Israel were almost ideological twins, and that is why the collaboration was. And I think that can be accused even today. If Modi chose Israel as the first country, everybody would have jumped. And now people are asking for the last 1 year why he did not go. That was the question. It is not that when is he going. If you look at it, people are actually asking what is the reason. And actually our foreign minister said in 2015, at the end of in May, in this year Prime Minister will go. He didn't. So it became actually a problem that why, what happened? Is there any tension with Israel and why he is not going? So in other words, Hindutva was a bone of criticism in 2003 when Ariel Sharon came. And Ariel Sharon being a controversial figure even in Israel. And if you look at in 2003, not many Western countries were willing to host him. And Belgium actually talked about trying him for a war crime. So therefore, that was the climate. He actually went to about 5 countries before he came to India. So at that time, yes, inviting Ariel Sharon was seen as an ideological convergence. But today, I wouldn't see that anybody would say that.
Thank you. Are there 2 or 3 people?
Oh, just one small thing. If you look at the 10 years of UPA, the political engagement between India and the Middle East was very minimal. Because the two foreign ministers we had were tied down domestically. Both Pranab Mukherjee and Salman Khurshid were actually doing coalition firefighting rather than focusing on the foreign policy issues. The only exception was S.M. Krishna, but he didn't survive pretty long time. And for the Middle East was actually left to our junior minister, E. Ahmed. And for him, the constituency was Kerala and the Muslim League. So his agenda was very limited. As a junior minister, he could not meet most of the senior leaders in the Middle East. And if you look at it, that's not the case today.
Thank you. Let me, I have Jonathan Paris, if you could identify yourself for the benefit of others.
An old friend of Roy. I'm an author of two Legatum Institute monographs, one Prospects for Iran, and the other Prospects for Pakistan, although they're a bit dated. My questions are on the geopolitical, but not on the MEPP, not on the Middle East Peace Process. I agree with you, that was yesterday's priority. Today's priority for Israel is Iran. The other priority for Israel is China. So my two questions are, one, could you ever imagine if Modi and Bibi get along, that Modi could use his good offices to talk with the Iranians and say, you know, life would be a lot easier for you guys if you didn't always start this rubbish about eliminating Israel. You know, Israel is a natural ally of Iran historically, but the Revolutionary Guard and their government think differently. Is there any role in the future for India to play, because I can't think of any other country that has relations with both Iran and Israel that could do it, not Russia. And the second question is China. If you're Israel, you're looking at Asia. They definitely are not beginning a pivot. They're in the middle of their pivot to Asia. But how do you persuade an Israeli to say, well, China offers you many things, but India offers you something more?
Thank you. If you respond to that, then we'll pick up.
Okay. Mediation, it's very tempting, honorable. I wouldn't do that. For the simple reason, India is talking to both them, correct? India is not the only country talking to both of them. China is there, Russia is there, quite a few countries probably. I don't think India has a critical influence on both of them. I think that is where the precondition is. I don't think that we have reached that spot. So today I would rather spend my energy in engaging with the region. If you look at the visits and others, we never had a bilateral visits. The last state visit from Iran was Khatami, 2003. From India, Vajpayee. Manmohan Singh went to Iran for a NAM summit, which was converted into state visit. So the kind of political engagement was very limited. Ahmadinejad made a stopover on the way from Sri Lanka, but that's not a state visit. So we don't have the political. So I wouldn't, until I have a critical influence, I wouldn't even try that. My wife is a Chinese national. Okay? So I can say anything against China, but I have to go back, right? So, I'm very down to earth thing. I'm not one of those persons who want to compete with China A to Z. I wouldn't do that. I want to grow myself independent of China. Whether China does, China doesn't, I would do it. The only problem for Israel is, while Israel can deal with India on every issue under the sun, which is not possible with China, largely because of the United States. Nothing to do with me. US is not very happy Israel is doing a lot of things with China. So therefore, I wouldn't even compete and complicate relationship. I wouldn't do that. I'm sorry, in both the cases I have to disappoint, but I wouldn't.
James.
James Chillington at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. At the outset, thank you for this very comprehensive review. There was something that you touched upon at the beginning of your talk, which was, or Rahul rather referred to perhaps, about India and Israel and the United States. That kind of sort of triangular relationship that developed. And I just wanted to say that if you recall that 5 years before the recognition in 1992, when Rajiv Gandhi visited New York and Washington in 1987, that was the point at which he made the first really significant contacts with the Friends of Israel on Capitol Hill. And ever since then, there has been a substantial overlap, at least in membership, between the pro-Israel lobby and the pro-India lobby in Congress. And that is not accidental. And Stephen Solarz, for instance, back then was an important figure in developing India's relations. Now, what I want to ask you is whether you could say something about that. Where what is that triangular relationship today, especially given the very unusual nature of the Trump administration and the very unusual role taken by his son-in-law Jared Kushner, whose father has been a leading Zionist. So, could you say something about that?
Before relations, before relations were established, there is a popular expression in Israel. Road to Washington passes through Jerusalem. And they actually used it to the best of their ability to negotiate. And it's true that, the kind of supports India receives in the United States and Israel receives almost from the identical group. It's no accident. And that was also visible partly during the nuclear deal and everything. It's very clear it's not that. There is a convergence of interests, you say that's right. But what I would say that, India's proximity with the United States is independent of Israel. After the end of the Cold War, after the disappearance of the Soviet Union, Indian leaders made a strategic decision, okay, there is going to be a different world order, and we need to cooperate and get closer to the United States. And that was a strategic decision. While, I would argue that even without an Israel, India could have done that. So, while Israel was important in the pre-92, pre-normalization phase, in the role in promoting the Indo-US relationship after 92 is much smaller than before. We can go back to Emanuel Seller in 1950, recognition, everything. Yes, US always had a role pushing India for normalization. But these were before 92. But after 92, India made a strategic choice. Okay, it is still not popular with all the parliamentarians in India. Fine. Yes, a large section still oppose the proximity. That's a different story. But I would say that while India benefits from the Israeli supporters in the United States, it's no longer the basis for the Indo-Israel relationship, Indo-US relationship. Actually, Indo-US relationship is actually contributing to Indo-Israeli relationship, not the other way around. US is playing a greater role in facilitating. Israel is no longer in a position to do that as it was the case. And the second thing is, if you look at the Israel's influence in Washington, is not what it was before 92. We can pick up any number of examples. Israel is not able to achieve quite a lot of things. Trump, I don't know what will happen by the time I take the flight tomorrow evening. Okay, so we are talking almost on a hourly running commentary time. It's more exciting than the 2020 matches. So therefore, I wouldn't make anything on the basis of that. I would keep my fingers crossed. But I would engage with him because he's the only address available in Washington. But I would be a little careful. Because, there is always the day after. So therefore, I wouldn't burn myself over whatever things come up. So I would be engaging the due, courteous, polite, normal, diplomatic engagement, but I wouldn't put my hopes.
The gentleman there, if you could identify yourself, please. Yes.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. A quick comment and a question. The first comment is just a detail to add on to your point with respect to Modi visiting the UAE. I think there was somewhat of an uneven quid pro quo vis-a-vis the land grant that was given by the Sheikh for the first Hindu temple. So I think there's a bit more to it. That's the comment. The question is, it'll be interesting to learn a bit more about the soft power relations between India and Israel. What are Israel doing on the ground vis-a-vis academic collaboration, endowing chairs as they've been doing up and down China, and also anything to say on tourism, direct flights, and beyond Goa? Thank you.
Yeah, temple, yes. That's a quid pro quo, yes. Actually, in the sense, this is how you work. You show your courtesy to respecting others, and the others try to respect. That's why the diplomatic engagement works. That's your right. Immediately after the Sheikh announced the thing. On the soft power, establishing academic chair is not easy in India as in the West. It's not just a question of money. You have all the UGC regulations and others. And there is the chairs are normally established by the government, not even by the private individuals in India. With the great difficulties, you could actually do that. So in the Israeli case, establishing an Indian chair in a state-funded university is not going to be easy.
Or scholarships, or just
Scholarship is there. They give about 5 scholarships a year, which is not a major number in that sense. But it's going to take a lot of time. And probably they could make headway in the private universities. That's why the Israeli focus would be more on the private sector, not on the state one. And tourism, it's normally people flag this, there is a large Israeli backpackers going to India and everything. About 10 years ago, I did some survey, and then at that time, the number of Israeli tourists annually was 2 million. And the number of Israelis going to India was 20,000, 1%. So therefore, I don't think any major changes happen in that. So when you talk about 40,000 is fine, but 40,000 out of how many? So therefore, this is one. And the second thing is, backpackers don't actually contribute to your economy. Okay, let's be very honest. It's very nice to have in India, fine, but financially terms, you are on a shoestring budget, you don't actually contribute to money. So in that sense, you can actually expose them to Indian culture and diversity. In financial terms, I would prefer a 5-star tourist.
Antoine Levesque, double Research Associate, South Asia.
Thank you, Rahul. Antoine Levesque. My question relates to the military dimension. Could you perhaps tell us a little bit more about how important Israel is to India's plans for overseas weapons procurement, and particularly is in your view is Israel essential to India's efforts to develop missile defense technology?
Yes, missile defense are going to be the major areas of cooperation. If you look at the kind of deals which are signed recently, either they are in terms of missiles to surface-to-air missiles or missile defense. These are the major key areas. The other areas I would say is small arms and ammunition, and then the radar ones. These are the major areas of cooperation. And I don't see in all the avionics and force multiplier added to that. But even if you look at the Falcon, it is basically IL-76 Russian model with an Israeli technology. So this is how it's going to be. But the platform is going to be the real issue. Platform is going to be the major issue.
What does that mean, not having a platform?
Aircrafts, tanks, ships. That's the largest ones. Israel doesn't export. You can say Merkava tanks. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think Israel is offering to sell Merkava tanks, the latest versions, which has all the security implications. You need to have aircrafts. Israel doesn't export. Probably Israel can supply some of the technology developed for Lavi for any of the other things. So it's only radar, avionics, and add-on and missile system, not the platforms. I think that's where it's going to be. And if we have to go to the next stage of R&D, I think that is where you need a political understanding. I think that is probably what one can expect from Modi. Okay, this is the kind of agreements and understanding and guarantees India will provide. And I think that is where probably you can say, okay, we are going to develop the next generation of weapons jointly, either in India or in Israel. Because Israeli leaders have been making statements that we will be part of the Make in India campaign. That is what they were thinking. But how far they are willing to do it? Because, if you look at Sweden is ready to sell the make the whole thing, okay, you can manufacture the aircrafts in India. But whether Israel can go that far, given the security impediments and all the advance, because it needs a technology age over the Arabs. So therefore, given that, how far Israel is willing to walk the talk? I think that's going to be a key issue.
Sudhar and Nataraja, yes.
Sudhar Nataraja from SWAT. Could you say something about where foreign policy on Israel would be made? So there's a coherent picture of a long-term, slow-burning strategy to engage the Middle East. But also there's no ideological component from the BJP. And you also said that state governments have increased inflation. So where is Indian foreign policy on Israel made at different levels?
Okay, it's I would still it's a tentative reading. For about from 48, you thought Israel was a liability in dealing with the wider Middle East. By talking to Israel, others will not talk to you, therefore you will keep away from them. But what is happening is you are integrating Israel into your Middle East policy. Because you are recognizing a number of countries do not have an existential problem with Israel. It's like I have a problem with my brother. So similarly, Israel has a problem with other countries. So the level of hostility has come down. And if you look at countries like Saudi Arabia, they have a tactical understanding with Israel on certain issues. And I was able to travel in the last 4 years. My passport is full of Israeli visas. So I made it a point that if I'm going to a country on the visa, not in clandestine way. I was able to go to Morocco, Manama, Abu Dhabi with a passport with the Israeli thing. So I could see that there is a change happening on the ground. About 5 years ago, I don't think it was possible. They would have simply, no, Israeli passport, either you get a new passport or you can't. So there is a change in the thing. And with the result, India is able to say, okay, Israel is part of the Middle East. Previously, you need to segregate the two, either Israel or the Arab countries. Today, you no longer have to make the distinction, number one. Number two, if you look at the last 20 years, India's relations with the Middle East politically improved after normalization than before. If you look at all the 4 heads of states who came to the Republic Day parade, they came after 92. Algeria, Saudi Arabia, Iran and UAE. It never happened before. So the kind of political visit, that's the case. And I think that is where I would look at it. Israel is now part of the Middle East in the Indian context. By engaging with Israel, you can actually make India more visible and attractive to the Arabs. You're not the only guy. If you want my support, you have to quote it. You have to negotiate it. You have to actually trade off, which was not the case. If you look at the classical importance of this Abbas visit was, until that day, India said we support a sovereign, democratic, independent, united, viable Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as a capital. And if you look at Abbas, East Jerusalem is not there. He simply said independent, sovereign, viable Palestinian state. No reference, democratic is your choice. How democratic I am. So there is no longer a reference to Jerusalem. Yes, sir.
So you want to follow up?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about where
it's made, where foreign policy in Israel is made. Is that the question?
So it is not BJP headquarters, it's not South Block, it's not in the state's capital. So it's in that sense. If you want
Okay. It's not a question of Israel alone. This is what I was telling my friend. In India, in the last 2 years, on most sensitive, important decisions are taken by one person. He doesn't tell me.
Professor Kumaraswamy is talking of a prime ministerial led
Exactly.
foreign policy.
It is led by him. I don't think anybody is privy to that. Most of the decisions are completely taken aback by all the people. They simply, okay, this is the latest news. Okay.
Brigadier Ben Barry, double senior fellow for land warfare.
Missile defence is an area where Israel has growing capability. For example, its Iron Dome missile and its Arrow missile. Don't you think that this collaboration would be regarded with great suspicion in Islamabad and Beijing and seen as introducing a destabilising element to the strategic balance in Asia as a whole?
Arrow has been talked about for quite some time. And India is not the only country. A few other countries have also expressed interest in Arrow. Iron Dome, I think, is much narrower in terms of its range. I don't know, even Israel needs the dozens of Iron Dome for its defense. How many? I would need thousands of them, literally. So I don't think Iron Dome would be in that context. Arrow, yes. But I think, yes, if there is a collaboration on missile defense, countries will be apprehensive, and which is naturally so. I think that would depend upon where India draws the line at the end of the day. I'm going to, okay, you are very sensitive, okay, I'm going to fold my plans, or okay, this is my red line, you accept, don't accept, that's your problem. I think that's entirely up to India, how India is going to draw the line. Earlier time, okay, consensus and everything, non-action has become the common Indian refrain. Okay, everybody is, no, don't do anything. But if you look at last 2 years, whatever he did, most of the things from demonetization, everything is simply extremely controversial. And he simply said, this is what I want to do. So I would rather be vilified by acting rather than not acting. That has been Modi's strategy. You criticize me, even otherwise you're going to criticize me. Let me rather do it and get criticized. So probably, that entirely depends upon how India draws the line.
So before we end, okay, let me just take one more question, then I have my last question at the end. Yes, please.
Benjamin Wilson, Pericles Foundation. I just got back from Israel this weekend and did a nice big round with some policymakers and business types. Very enthusiastic. They're very enthusiastic about the relations with India, growing about 20 to 30%, also with China, also with African countries, and it's deepening very well. I have a question about maybe India's role in the region and the upcoming visit, because relations with the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia have been developing in a positive way, but under the radar in the last few years, because of the common interest posed with the threat from Iran, also the usefulness of Israeli technology. They have their sensitivities, they of course have their populations and so on, and they prefer to keep this under the radar. Does India have a role in this? And will Prime Minister Modi's visit...
Role in what sense? With the Gulf?
The positive relations between Israel and the Gulf states. And is that going to be a factor or something to be discussed in the context of this visit?
Most probably Netanyahu will mention it.
Yeah.
Okay? But I don't think, if I'm advising Modi, I say, okay, listen, thank you very much. Because why would I burn my fingers with unnecessary issues?
Sure.
Okay? If I don't have a good relation with the Gulf regions, fine. I have a good relations with the Gulf countries on a one-to-one basis without any third-party intervention. So why would I complicate the relationship? Okay, it's not my problem. So I wouldn't get into this. It's very nice, India wanted to play a mediator role, it's fine. That's it. I wouldn't do anything, because the moment I overreach beyond my capacity, I only complicate my relationship. I would rather not do it. India today, in per capita power parity, 4th largest economy. When I am the 3rd or the 2nd, let's talk, not before that.